Peterson shows a strange, confused, and leftist college professor what's up after he brings up questions asking him why he refuses to cave to the so-called transgender gender ideology that seems to plague the West all over, no matter where you are, be it United States, Canada, England. You just can't hear enough about this stuff. So guys, this is gonna be an interesting video and I think you're gonna enjoy it. But first, everybody, please make sure you like our video, share it around, and subscribe to the Resist the Mainstream YouTube channel. That way we can keep bringing you guys this great content, guys. So please do go ahead and subscribe. We appreciate it. As always, I'm your host, Darian, and let's go ahead and get right into the video.
Professor Peterson.
Oh.
Hi, Barry.
Hi.
So good to see you up there.
You too.
I teach students. I teach trans students, and I'm asked often to call people singularly they. It started probably about 4 years ago. It struck me as very odd. I'm 52. And some of them, you can tell that it's coming from a very deep place, and that's how they feel, and they deeply need to be called they. Some of them, my horse sense says that they're kind of enjoying giving me a certain shock and that there's a certain theatrical aspect. It's my horse sense that there's a certain épate le bourgeois aspect to it. I kind of feel it, and I'm probably right. But I can't know. I'm a linguist, I'm a person, and my general feeling has been, whatever they ask, just go with it, and let's change our usage of the pronouns, because we have a lot to do. Now, what you said was interesting. You said that the way that you make the difference in deciding these cases is based on the fact that you have psychological training and you can tell. What I want to know is, for my own elucidation, and also because I think many of us wondered, but then it kind of went by, how do you know? Now, I want to specify, I'd rather you didn't recount the whole episode of how ridiculously you were treated amidst that whole controversy.
Sure. Yeah.
3/4 of the room knows. I sympathize with you. I thought it was ridiculous. I want to know specifically, because I'm a linguist, you have psychological training. How would you know?
Well,
and if you hear, I'm almost done.
Oh yeah, no
If you
problem.
hear a tiny bit of skepticism in my voice, you're correct. However, I am open to being convinced. Based on your training, which is immense, how would you know which students to discount as opposed to which ones to go along with?
Okay. Well, first of all, I wouldn't know, right? Which is partly why your skepticism is justified. But I have to be responsible for what I say based on my willingness to take responsibility for my judgment. So I would be willing to do that despite the fact that I might be wrong. But having said that, in any reasonable situation, I would err on the side of addressing the person in the manner that they requested to be addressed. But that's not the issue for me. The issue is now I'm compelled by law to do so. It's like, no, not doing it, not now, because it's compelled by law. So that's the end of the game as far as I'm concerned. So, because there is no excuse for compelling it by law. That's my position, and I think there's all sorts of reasons for that. I don't think it was an isolated legislative move. I think it's part and parcel of a whole sequence of legislative moves that have been made and that continue to be made in Canada. I think it's an attempt by a certain radical ideological, what would you say, a certain radical ideology to gain the linguistic upper hand, which I think is a terrible thing to do, to allow. So I had lots of reasons for rejecting the legislation, but it had nothing to do with it.
About how your psychological training would make the difference. That's very interesting. We're talking about expertise here, and my ears pricked up when you talked about how there is a way of thinking that would allow us to decide. I know some of my
No, there's a way of
students-
thinking that would allow me to decide for me.
No, us to decide for us. Surely you have a larger mission than just what's going on in your own head, and I mean that.
No, I had a perfectly straightforward mission, which was there's no damn way I was going to say those words when I was compelled to by law.
But
That
you
was
didn't
my
wanna-
mission.
You weren't trying to model for the rest of us a way of thinking. It was really only about you?
No, well, it was about me and the law. I thought the lawmakers had gone too far. They'd stepped out of their appropriate territory into the domain of linguistic freedom.
You notice how this guy who's grilling Peterson right now seems to be more concerned about why Peterson won't call a male or a female a they, them, or whatever other stupid made-up term they try to force him to call. He's more concerned about why Peterson won't do it than he is the fact that these people are literally trying to legislate it into speech, and in some cases have, to a point where they'll give you legal penalties for not going along with their sick agenda. It's really telling.
And as far as I was concerned, I was going to put up with that. And so if people were happy about that and wanted to follow the example, well, that was fine with them. But for me, it was something, and that was the statement. I'm not doing this. And then if people can draw their own conclusions from that, maybe they want to do it. I mean, and I've spoken with no shortage of trans people, and my proclivity has been without exception so far to address them in the manner that seems most socially appropriate under the circumstances. Now, you asked a specific question, which was, do I have special expertise that I might share with other people?
You're doing Martin Luther, and I think that these issues are a little subtler than those. And so,
well, what makes you think that you're doing the kids that are grandstanding any favors by going along with their manipulation?
Because I can't decide which ones those are. Well, I just have my gut instincts, and that's not good enough.
Look, fair enough, but you have a type 1 and type 2 error problem. So one error is that you don't call students what they deserve to be called. That's one error. And the other error is that you call students what they want to be called even though they don't deserve it. And so what you're trying to do optimally is to minimize both those errors. And to do that, you have to take a middle route. Now, what you've decided to do, and I'm not criticizing it, is you've decided to allow for the possibility 100% of one of those errors because you think it's a less significant error. And, you might be right. But it's not like you're acting in an error-free manner. You've just decided to minimize one form of error at the expense of the other. Because I would say you're allowing, what would you call it, attention-seeking and somewhat narcissistic undergraduates to gain the upper hand over you in your class. Now, believe me, it's not a criticism. It's not a criticism. I understand why you're doing it.
Isn't John just erring on the side of generosity and compassion?
I have one more thing to say, because I'm not going to take it.
Isn't he just generous and compassionate? I mean, he's just such a good guy. How could you criticize it? So self-righteous and annoying. You're not being compassionate and generous by lying to somebody about their identity. That's a narrative I'm so sick of hearing, and we should never stand for.
Any more space.
Okay.
Are you saying that psychological theory has nothing to teach us about this? Because you're talking around my question. You're gorgeously articulate. You're smarter than me. Does psychology have anything to teach us or not? Yes or no? On this question.
I don't think that it has anything to teach. I don't think it has anything to offer that I could teach you without, let me think.
So it's just too complicated?
No, it's not. No, it's not that. Well, it is that in part because it's not easy to articulate out the principles, the unerring principles by which you would make such a categorical judgment, right? Because those are very situation-specific problems. And it's part of the problem of how to make a generic moral truth applied to a very individualistic situation. And the problem in the sorts of situations that you're describing is generally the devil's in the details, right? You have all these students, the ones that you just laid out, they vary in their attitude towards their self-professed gender from the ones who are grandstanding to some degree, let's say, to the ones that are very serious. And you have to make a judgment in the moment that is dependent on the variables that present themselves in a very complex way in that situation. And I understand why you took the pathway that you took, and it's perfectly reasonable to do so. My point was that you don't minimize.
He took that pathway because he's a coward. It's just the easiest way to do it, and that's why he does it. I'm just going to say that because Peterson is too nice and polite to say it, but it's true.
All the errors by doing so. It's fine. It's still a fine way of approaching. It isn't. My point was that because of my psychological acumen, I would say that the experience that I've derived is that I would be comfortable in making the judgment and taking the consequential risk. I'm not saying I'd be correct. That's not the same thing at all. I'm willing to suffer the consequences of my error. That's not the same thing as being right. And so if I feel that a student is manipulating me, then I'm not going to go along with it. Now, I might be wrong about that and actually hurt someone who's genuinely asking for something that they need. But I'm also, what would you say, sensitive to the error of allowing manipulation to go unchecked. So, aha, you're back.
No, John.
Okay.
And then there could be a 2-hour podcast about this on your wonderful podcast, which everyone should listen to.
Everything you're saying is very well put, but it's awfully slippery. And I know you can do better. This is too slippery for me.
Invite him on. Okay, hands.
Well, guys, that wraps up the clip. Hope you enjoyed it. I myself always like an intellectual discussion. And let me clarify, Peterson was the intellectual of that discussion. I'm not saying the entire crowd was, just to make that clear. But yeah, I enjoyed the video. I hope you did too. Please comment below, let us know what you think, what you want to see in the future, and we'll see you guys again soon. Thanks so much, and God bless.